Well, good morning for my online classes, both my full semester and second 8 weeks class. I'm recording this lecture here on March the 19th, so near the end of spring break. Hope you've had a nice and pleasant spring break, and you've got your batteries recharged and ready to go through the rest of the semester here. We're at a point where I would think pretty soon you'll have the second 8 weeks class start to catch up with that full semester. Second 8 weeks class, it certainly does move fast, and I would think many of you in that class are already on to roughly chapter 4 in the class, and so here we are with chapter 9, political parties. We'll continue on, of course, until we get to the end of chapter 15 on the Supreme Court. The last 3 chapters, as we mentioned, we really use primarily for our research papers, and that's something that I would hope that many of you are starting to put together and plan. You know the topics that you have, and that's what you need to do, is to pick one of those topics to do your research over found in the course syllabus. All right, let's move on now to chapter 9 on political parties. So let's have a bit of an update here on where we are with the race for the White House. We're still 8 months away from roughly the presidential election, but we know we're in the selection process, and we'll probably have this selection process wrapped up by the end of March. Now, it's possible that that won't happen. As we can see here for the Republican Party, there's a greater likelihood that the Republican Party may go on even longer with the delegate count. But we do see that halfway through, in terms of the number of delegates needed, Donald Trump does have that percentage. It has that number. As I'm recording this, they're still waiting for the outcome of the state of Missouri. And let's keep in mind, in the Republican Party, the rules here, thinking about what we've covered dealing with voting behavior in Chapter 8, and we'll turn our attention to this even more in Chapter 10 when we look at campaigns and elections. But the Republican Party, from March 15th onward, for most of the states, will have a winner-take-all system. And so the outcome of Missouri becomes very important. The second candidate there is Cruz, and so he's I believe a few thousand votes behind, but if he was to surpass Trump, he would get all the delegates from Missouri, and same thing for Trump there. So the margin will be wider or closer, depending on how that vote ultimately turns out. But that's where we are right now within the Republican ranks. For the Democrats, as we can see here, you have a fairly close election as well. This is not adding on to the super delegate count, but Hillary Clinton has more than half, roughly about half the delegates that she needs for that selection process. So I say that it could be wrapped up by the end of March. We could also certainly, by the time of graduation in early May, still be debating exactly who's winning the nomination for these 2 parties. And of course, as we know, when we talk about our system, we really are focusing on the 2-party system. As you read through Chapter 9, you can get some ideas that there are many countries that are democracies that have certainly more than 2 political parties, and it's a very good question as to why we have only 2. And there were some good discussions in my full semester class, and I anticipate when we get to that discussion and the second 8 weeks class, we'll have some good discussions there as well on whether the 2-party system is really the way to go in our country. I mean, over 300 million people. Are we best represented by having only 2 political parties? Now, many of you did say, well, it's better to organize it that way. And it is certainly a disciplined system generally until it breaks down, of course, and then we have some real problems, which we may be facing right now. But a multi-party system does lead to some more complexities simply because you have more political parties and candidates on the ballot. So while many of you did support the multi-party system, there were those of you who had some questions about the stability of the multi-party system, and that perhaps the 2-party system creates more stability. But one of the things that certainly we can conclude about two parties, or about the political parties in general, is where would we be in modern democracy without them? And there can be plenty of criticism about parties, and perhaps in many ways that criticism is partisanship, how people feel towards others who are of a different political party. But in terms of organizing, getting people on the ballot, giving people choices, do we not need political parties? Well, E.E. Schatzsnyder, a well-known political scientist from the 1950s, argued strongly that you had to have political parties or you just didn't have democracy, not in the modern sense, not in a complex system that we have here in the United States. Again, just think about the size of the United States in terms of the land size, the complexity, urban, rural, suburban, and then think about just the overall population and the multicultural society that we're in. Are not political parties that vehicle that people can use to express themselves in our democracy? So as you can see here from this quote from Schatzsnyder, political parties created democracy, and modern democracy is unthinkable save in terms of parties. So at least from his perspective, it's important to keep this in mind, that parties are necessary if we want to maintain a democracy. What are political parties? You can see there from your quote, from your text, organized groups that attempt to influence the government by electing their members to important government offices. And here we have what started off as the number of Republican candidates for president. That was the group that I put together when I recorded this lecture in the summer of 2015. And so here we are in the spring 2016. Probably, you know, a good 8 months ago or so, we went from the number that we see there to now having 3 candidates on the ballot. And do keep that in mind. I mentioned that Rubio had a sizable number of delegates, and here we can see Senator Rubio from Florida. Well, he is now not in the race. And so we've seen a considerable whittling down of the candidates. And that, of course, is what the campaign process is supposed to do. And we've seen that occur here. So again, the importance of political parties. We do have, of course, because of political parties, we have a divided government. But would we not have, in some ways, some sort of divisions, even if parties didn't exist? So a divided government would be one in which you have of the 2 parties, you have one party representing one branch of government of the 3 branches, and then the other party representing the other branch. Primarily, we're looking at, of course, the Supreme Court's not supposed to be partisan, although they're picked by people who are partisan. But you have a president, currently, we have in our division, we have a president that's a member of the Democrat Party, and then Congress a majority Republican in both houses. So we have divided government. And that may cause some problems, of course, but again, what does it mean to not have parties, and do parties matter? And I was struck by this occurrence in the Southeastern Asian country of Thailand a couple of years ago. USA Today headline, Thai military declares coup, detains party leaders. So the military of Thailand took over. And that's a coup, where the military just essentially kicks out the government and says we're in charge. And generally it is the military that would generate a coup d'etat, overthrow of the state. It's a French term for overthrow of the state. But what was one of the first things that they did once they took over? They detained party leaders. So the attitude of having different ways of thinking, different ways of channeling complaints and organizing opposition, that goes through political parties. So if you want to eliminate that, if you want to eliminate the complaints, organized opposition, you get rid of political parties, and that's what the Thai military did. That's what happened in the one-party system under National Socialism in Germany, July 14th, 1933. The Nazi Party took over, and when they did, they outlawed all other political parties. So I'm always struck by the idea that when people say parties really don't matter, if they don't matter, then why were the people who were so concerned about having a unified system, or really a system in which there were no opposition voices, if parties really didn't matter, why would the National Socialists take such great concern to eliminate the opposition voices? I think we can conclude that if you're wanting a dictatorship, one of the first things you try to do is to eliminate those opposition voices and that organization to opposition political parties. Well, political parties then serve the system. We can make some conclusions that they are important in our system, and now we can explore some of the ways in which they help serve our political system. They recruit candidates. This becomes extremely important in ways in which, especially if you have a party that's out of power in a state or a district within a state, and they need to try to identify people to run for Congress, identify people to run for governor, state legislature. This is a major undertaking if you're in the opposition party and one party is very entrenched and considerably powerful. You're asking people to raise money and take risk and ultimately perhaps lose, because that's the reason why one party is so strong, that the opposition party has limited opportunities to gain success. But nevertheless, that needs to happen. You need to try to identify people who will get out there and run. So they recruit candidates. They nominate candidates. And so that's the process that we've been exploring in the last few weeks. If you looked at the primary process, you have, in some cases, primaries where people go and cast their ballot to pick a candidate, or they go to a caucus and they're organized and they have to meet at a set time and openly declare which candidate they'll support. And so here you can see the caucus. In nominating a candidate, you show up at a set time and you must publicly announce which candidate you support. This generally means you have fewer people showing up. The state of Kansas, right across the border here in Oklahoma, they have a caucus system. The primary, as we know, you vote in the general election. You open, registered voters can participate, so you don't have to be a member of the political party that you're voting for. And closed, only registered party members can participate. So this is all under that category of nominating a candidate. So it's either through the caucus system or the primary system. That's primarily the way that it's picked. Now you can also have the convention, and that's possible, as you've been following this, that if there are not enough delegates in the Republican ranks, then you could have an open convention, and that the candidate for president for the Republican Party will be picked at the convention. So here's just giving you some idea of the process that has occurred so far, and the caucus primary calendar that we've witnessed through a good period of our time here together. And so what's led us up to where the candidates are in terms of their success, with Donald Trump on the Republican side, Hillary Clinton on the Democrat side. We've seen from February to March, 6-week period roughly, decisions made on who will be in that race and who will drop out. And some of these have had open primaries where people can show up and be a member of the other party and get the ballot, just declare what ballot they want and go and vote in that primary. There are many states, though, that have a closed primary. And then you also have, of course, some differences in terms of how the delegates are decided based on the outcome of the election. So you do have a winner-take-all system for many of the Republican primaries and caucuses, as you can see here. There were periods in which there were times in which you did have the caucuses and primaries proportional. And then you can see throughout the whole system in the Democrat Party, it's proportional. A proportional system means that you can lose and still gain delegates. Missouri turned out to be a very competitive state for both Republicans and the Democrats. But Bernie Sanders has conceded, and even though he lost by, I think, a few thousand votes out of okay, let's see what we got here. All right. We've had some difficulty with the recording. I'm going to continue to talk over it. I'm sorry about that, everyone. Looks like, I don't know if you can see me on the picture, but we can still see the proportional system. I'm going to move on, and sorry for the, as long as the recording's going and you can see the PowerPoint, I'm just going to talk over it. I don't know what happened there, but we'll move on. So as a result of some of the extensions that take place, ultimately, even though you have a strong indication that one candidate's going to win, it may really be a situation you had a case of, it wasn't until May 29th that he actually won, even though, again, he was ahead throughout most of that period. So I'm continuing on with the recording, hopefully that this is working out. Notice here about the Democrat primary that you have, the Oklahoma primary. On March the 1st, 2016, you had a closed primary for Republicans and a semi-open primary for Democrats. So a little different in our state than what it had been. Traditionally, it had been a closed primary for both Republicans and Democrats, and semi-open for Democrats, meaning that it was you could be a registered independent and you could still vote in the Democrat primary. So a little different there for the party this time around. Okay, so that's how they go about nominating candidates. They also mobilize voters. Again, think back to Chapter 8. Face-to-face campaigning is the most effective, asking people personally to go vote for a candidate. That seems to work really well. It takes a lot of organization, a lot of manpower, women power to get people out there to go vote. So a lot of organization. The two major parties have that strength. And so that's what we can see there on mobilizing voters, getting people out to vote. So that the parties even will get people to the polls, you know, pick them up and take them there, remind them about the election, and this is certainly done through social media a great deal. But again, that face-to-face contact becomes very important. And then contest elections. I mean, you have to have more than one person on the ballot for this to be a democracy. There has to be some choices. And so that's certainly been the process in our election system. So you have to have more than one candidate on the ballot. In our case, we may have only two, but at least we have more than one candidate on the ballot. If not, you have a dictatorship, right? And so you could have a case where Fidel Castro, that's him in this picture here, who's been in some ways the dictator of Cuba now for well over 50 years. And he may win an election, but he may also be the only person on the ballot. So how legitimate is that election? It certainly is not contested. We can also see then that the parties provide accountability. And this is harder to do with divided government. You have a case there where you have a Democrat president and Republican majority in Congress, Republican president and Democrat majority in Congress. That's all the cases of divided government. So you have a case then of who you may want to give credit to or who you want to give blame to, and that really depends, I suppose, on how you view the two parties. So that's part of the issue that goes on in a situation of providing accountability. So divided government make it a little harder to decide who do you reward and who do you punish, because in this situation both parties are sharing power. And so that was our situation through a good period of President Obama's tenure as president. He had a Republican majority in the House and now also Republican majority in the Senate. So here's one of his times where he was spending with the former Speaker of the House, John Boehner. Paul Ryan is now the Speaker of the House, and we'll certainly talk about that more when we turn to chapter 12 in our text about Congress. Now, one of the things that the parties used to do, they don't really do this anymore, is provide social services. We have a federal government that can provide these kinds of services, but there was a time in which the political parties were known to provide what we would consider in many ways social service benefits today, or welfare benefits, food, job opportunities in some cases, clothing, places to stay, help with at least paying the rent, those kinds of things. And so that's when political parties, the boss systems as it would be called, would really be controlling a particular area. And so you would have, in that case, someone like Mayor Daley, who would be running the city of Chicago. And so if you wanted to get any particular type of job, you would have to work within the party system to make sure that you could do that. And that's how decisions were made, and it was, of course, in many ways a corrupt system. There was paybacks that were intended and expected, but it was also in some ways efficient. I mean, you knew if you paid people off, that's how you would get things done. But you all had to get that done through making sure that you were working within the confines of what the boss wanted in that case. Great movie that depicts all of this is The Gangs of New York. Probably a movie that many of you are familiar with, and it's worth watching, and for lots of different reasons. But that's a good part of the movie, is to just show about the old party system, where there was this expectation of that you would get something for your participation within the political system, but it was also expected that the system would be corrupt. All right, so we've now looked at the importance of having political parties and how the political parties serve our system. Let's look at beyond the two-party system here in the United States and consider that there are some competitive third parties. They don't have much success. In many ways, the way to review the career here of Ralph Nader, who was the candidate for the Green Party back in 2000. And by having him on the ballot, it's believed that he altered the outcome of the election in 2000, especially in the state of Florida, enough to allow George W. Bush, the Republican candidate, to win over Democrat candidate Al Gore. But the Green Party is a party that you might be familiar with in some ways. It's a pro-environmental rights party, very much focusing on trying to improve the environment in the United States, clean up pollution, have us just live different lifestyles, go to alternative uses of energy, and there's belief in large part that the Democrat Party is not serving that interest enough and that they need to break out and start their own political party. The current leader of the Green Party is Dr. Jill Stein, and she will be on the ballot in many states, and this is, of course, going back to Chapter 3 in federalism. We have many systems in the United States. Each state has its own way of determining voting outcomes and who will be on the ballot and determining the structure of the elections. So some states, she won't be on the ballot, and more than likely Oklahoma will be one of those states where the Green Party will not be able to be on the ballot. It's very difficult in Oklahoma, based on the rules that are devised in the state of Oklahoma, to get third parties on the ballot. Much more difficult here than really just about any other state. That's the same case here for the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party is the strongest of the third parties. And the Libertarian Party is on the ballot in every other state with the exception of Oklahoma. The Libertarian Party is a party of very minimal national government. So they want a national government for some military matters and also for law and order, some police matters. But many other things are not subject to the laws. So personal activities, as far as the Libertarian Party is concerned, issues like drug use, prostitution, those are not to be against the law. And then also major state institutions like education, that's funded privately, not through public services. Gary Johnson, a former Republican governor of New Mexico, is probably one of the best known candidates for the Libertarian Party and may very well be another presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. He's been very active in supporting the legalization of marijuana. But let's consider why third parties fail. And some of the reasons for that, they're too dependent on a single leader. You have that situation there with Ross Perot. In the early 1990s, he was a very successful third party candidate in 1992. But what happened to his party, once he, people for the, his third party, once it failed, or once he got out of the race, excuse me, then it started to fail. And that was part of the issue there that can happen for many third parties, that they're too dependent on a single leader. Or they may be too regional. The populist parties from the 1890s that believed that the moneyed interest from the East Coast was in the upper Midwest was too powerful. So from Chicago and New York City, for example. And the populists were strongly supported in the central parts of the United States and also the Southeast. But that was really where they were the strongest. And other parts of the country, they were not very well supported at all. So that can be an ongoing weakness for third parties, that it's too regional. Too fixated on a few issues. During Prohibition, you had a third party formed called Light Wine and Beer Party to keep that legal. If you wanted to have hard liquor banned, such as rum and whiskey, okay, but let's have light wine and beer available. Well, that might be a strong issue for some people, but more than likely not a strong enough issue to get people to support that party. Or simply just too radical. I mean, the National Socialist Party or the Communist Party, you know, the idea of banning people based on their ethnicity, I would like to think that that's just way too radical, as the National Socialists would stand for, or the Communist Party that wants to take over all private property. You've got to think that nationalize factories, for example, that would just be too radical for our system. Well, again, let's keep in mind why we have a two-party system. The big reason for that is one winner per district. A winner needs only a simple plurality of the vote. Our Duvigier's law, single district, simple plurality voting system, produces only two competitive parties. So we've talked about Duvigier's law once before, but you know, a strong reason why we have that two-party system here in the United States. One winner per district. And it is important to keep in mind the winner does not need a majority. So you could be a strong third party and get 20-30% of the vote. If you don't win outright, you don't get any representation. All right, some court cases here that we can see that are attached to political parties. Please review Smith and Allwright. 1944, cannot have an all-white Democratic Party. A Democratic Party primary. So this was a time where the Democratic Party has gone through an amazing transformation. There were still cases in the 1940s where, especially in the Old South, where the Democratic Party was really a white supremacist party. And so you could see large divisions within that party between the Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. So they wanted to have a Democrat Party primary that would exclude anyone who wasn't white, and that was found to be unconstitutional, that anyone can register in the party and vote in the primary. And so these are not private clubs then, as we can see here, that people have a right to join these political parties. And you don't have, the system is not structured in a way to prevent people from joining these political parties. You cannot then also give people an advantage in a public job because they're belonging to one political party. So if someone's wanting to work for the street department or be a highway patrolman, work in education, then having a membership in one political party over another cannot serve as an advantage. And we can see that in Rutan versus Republican Party of Illinois. So our system is, in many ways, has some structural differences to what we call proportional representation. So if you want more political parties, then you really have to start to change our election system and develop a system that allows for a multi-party system. And that would be through proportional representation, a multi-member district system that allows each political party representation in proportion to its percentage of the total vote. So for example, in Germany, one of the countries that's best known for having proportional representation, a few years back now, 2013, you had the Christian Democrats getting the largest percentage of the vote, and you had 5 political parties that made the threshold, meaning they had to get at least 10% of the vote to get representation in the Bundestag, which is like our Congress. So there were more than these 5 political parties on the ballot, but if you didn't reach that threshold, then you didn't get representation. So you had to have some do was form a coalition from this group here. So she's a member of the Christian Democrats, and she got a coalition with other members of the voting blocs within Germany. So what happens in Germany is that you combine first past the post and proportional representation. So you get one vote for a candidate, and then your second vote is for a party. So the candidates do have to get more votes than other candidates to win, depending on which candidate within the party would get representation. But the second vote is for the party. So you could vote for a party knowing full well that the party's not going to win outright or get more votes than one of the more dominant political parties like the Christian Democrats or Social Democrats. But you can hope then that one of the smaller political parties gets some representation. So needless to say, as many of you in your discussions, if you're wanting to have a multi-party system, we have to then somehow have a system where we have proportional representation. That may be pretty hard to achieve, but that could be the way to allow for more than 2 voices in our political system. So notice here at the very end some things that you ought to focus in the text on page 346, comparison there, the 2-party system versus the multi-party system, single district, simple plurality. Our system, it exaggerates the votes of the major parties. So you'll notice here on page 346, the Republicans got 47% of the vote, but they got 54% of the representation. So you end up with more representation if there's only 2 political parties on the ballot. So the multi-party system there in the Netherlands, you could see that there are more voices that are represented, and you don't have to win outright to get to win an election, to have some representation in the Parliament of the Netherlands. And notice the party systems. We'll conclude on this. I mean, we've had roughly 6 party systems in our history. We're kind of in a murky stage on what exactly you would describe our contemporary party system. But are we seeing in 2016 a realignment of the political parties? And you can read through these pages to describe these historical changes in our parties. And that maybe we will see at the end of 2016 a change in our political parties and change in our party system. This is making the 2016 election look very historical for our society here. We're going to end that on that note, and again, we've had some problems with our recording here today, and I apologize for that. If need be, if there's an issue here or not being able to see me, then you may need to go to one of the older recorded lectures here on Chapter 9 that I did, for example, in the fall 2015. Most of the same material would be on that recording. All right, so next week we'll be looking at Campaigns and Elections, Chapter 10.